to talk to you a little bit about how to prepare for your argument essay in a meaningful way, which includes counterarguments. So you might have heard of this before, but let's put a new spin on it because you're in a college class. So a counterargument helps you bring up an opposing viewpoint. Not everyone's going to agree with you all the time. We need to imagine that there's 8 billion people in the world and someone might disagree. It's usually a reasonable point that a real person would make. And so acknowledging counter arguments builds credibility, right? You get the ethos, and it makes you sound more mature, and it also makes you sound more reasonable. It's also a really great skill to kind of grow into as you start a new career or you get a new job, because everyone needs to be able to think of more than one viewpoint, right? You need to be in charge and you need to make big decisions. So speaking of, okay, you need to address concerns that people might have. You need to find weak spots in your arguments, right? And you need to demonstrate your world awareness. Again, this is like a life and job skill. People need to know that they can trust you and that you can think ahead to solve problems before they even start. And so that's why we include counter arguments, beside the part that like it just makes the argument stronger, right? If you know people are going to be worried and you alleviate their fears, they're more likely to trust you and believe in you. That makes sense, right? Okay, so this is the part that's a little bit different than maybe what you did in high school. Some people put one counter argument after your strongest body paragraph. And what that does is it kind of says, look, I'm really smart and this other guy might be wrong. Some people weave it into each body paragraph, and that's honestly my preference. You'll say, I think we should save all the baby seals. And you might bring up, like, people say that the environment makes that difficult. And you'll say, but this is why we should still do it. And somebody might say, but that's expensive. And in your next paragraph, you can explain why we should still do it. So the second one here, woven into a body paragraph, is usually my favorite, because if it's in every paragraph, you can't be wrong. Some people do it in the introduction. So basically you start with, I know you're worried about blank, but trust me, this is the right choice. And then other people do it at the end, right? And that's kind of a classical argument. Maybe that's the one you learned about in high school, where you say my reason, my reason, my reason, one paragraph about what other people might think and why they're wrong, and then your conclusion. Okay, so here's the tricky part. You have to make sure you don't argue against yourself for a whole paragraph so that it doesn't sound weird. A classical argument, this is the Aristotelian model, like Aristotle, says that you introduce your big idea, and that's in like your intro. You give some background, makes sense. You have body paragraphs that support your evidence, right, and support your idea. And then at the very end, you give a counter argument and you refute it. Don't forget, you have to refute it. You have to explain why you're still right. Otherwise, it sounds like you're arguing against yourself. The classical argument is the one most high schools do. So if you're comfortable with that, that's a thing. Rogerian's kind of exciting. You want to fairly address opposing views, right? So you start with, hey, these are all options for us for ending climate change. And then you create paragraphs that identify shared interest, right? And present balanced solutions that show more than one viewpoint. And you just try to come across as reasonable and fair. And so Rogerian is really like the life skill one that I hope we lean towards eventually, where you write like a person who's making a conversational, strong, focused opinion that shows that some people can change their minds, right? Or that everyone's ideas are worth including. The Tomlin model can be tricky, but I think it's really beautiful. So you start with your claim. You give your evidence and your bodies to support your claim. You have something called a warrant, which says these are things that we need to have in place before this can happen, right? And then you say, even if we need these things in place, even if these things have to happen, these counter arguments still don't matter, right? So you kind of get like, this is what I think, here's my evidence, here are the rules of how this would have to work. So very logical, almost like a scientific way of looking at things. And then finally you say, but all these other people who think something else, they're wrong. This can be really fun for my future science and mathematically minded people, because you're allowed to put rules into place, and that can be its own paragraph, a warrant. Okay, and so writing counter arguments wherever you put them in your paper, you put some may argue that, or you can name the people who might argue against you. When you say critics suggest, you might think of specific critics, like people who cannot afford to make this choice, or maybe people who are morally opposed to the choice that you'd like to make. But in the end, as long as you include them, right, that's really the most important thing. And so finally, as you take your quiz today, make sure you come back to why your argument's the correct one. Or if you give them credit and say, yeah, that might be true, you still want to circle back and say, but there's conditions where I am right. Or why does your argument matter more, right? And so when you're thinking about writing your paper, this is kind of something to keep in the back of your mind to make your argument as strong as possible. Please let me know if you have questions. We're going to practice it today in the quiz.